Hello and welcome to Learn Redis with Python and Django. I'm Xander and I'll be your guide throughout this course. Now this tutorial is part of a full course playlist available for free on YouTube. For a deeper, more structured learning experience, the complete course is also available on Udemy. You'll find all the links and resources in the video description. Now don't forget to subscribe to the channel for weekly promotions, exclusive discounts and Udemy course giveaways. Now, before we can start working with Redis, we need a consistent and simple development environment. So here in this course, we are using Docker. And the whole point of this is I want to create an environment, a setup, so that anyone can simply download any of the source code connected to any of the modules in this course, and with one command, have everything set up so that they can start to interact and follow along with the tutorials. Now, Docker helps us create isolated containers that keeps everything organized and predictable. So this topic is important because setting up a clean development environment early prevents many of the common mistakes and allows us to focus on, like I said, learning Redis itself. Now, this tutorial is primarily for new developers who may have not used Docker before, just need a quick refresh. So in this tutorial, we'll go ahead and download Docker Desktop, install, and then I'm just going to take you through the basics of Docker, the basic concepts to give you an underpinning understanding of Docker so that you can interact with it throughout this course. Docker can seem a little bit overwhelming to begin with, but in my opinion, once it's installed, and like I said, I'm going to show you just one command you need for Docker for the rest of this course. We're primarily using Docker, of course, to install or have Redis run from a container so that we don't actually have to install it on our machine and then potentially go through that process of trying to configure and maintain it on our local machine. Docker is going to allow us to create a container. We can start, we can stop, we can recreate. Really easy creating our Redis environment. So by the end of this tutorial, you'll have a working development environment ready for Redis. Right, so Docker is a lightweight platform that lets you package an application along with everything it needs to run. So instead of setting up different environments manually on your machine, Docker uses containers to isolate applications. So this means your setup stays clean, simple, and consistent no matter where you're working. So by using Docker, we can avoid common installation issues and focus on developing and running applications smoothly. Right, so the first step is installing Docker. So let me just give you a few pointers. It's a really simple process, whether you're on Windows, Mac, or Linux. From absolutely any browser, from any search engine, just type in Docker Desktop. Normally the top option would take you to the page where we can start downloading Docker Desktop. Now, Docker Desktop is an application that we install on our machine to easily manage Docker containers and images. It includes everything we need to run Docker on our local machine, such as the Docker engine, that's the core components that run our container, a graphical user interface for managing containers, tools to run, build and monitor our containers, as well as integration to Docker Hub, for example, where we can save our images online, and also automatic updates and system settings. So in short, Docker Desktop makes using Docker much simpler, especially for development. Now, we don't need to use Docker Desktop. You can simply interact with Docker using commands, but Docker Desktop just makes it a whole lot easier to initially work with Docker, and it's pretty much all that we're going to need to easily manage containers in this course. Right, so if you scroll down a little bit here, there will be a download. Now here I'm on Mac, so if I click this button here, it's probably going to show me a number of different downloads for Mac, but in actual fact, it shows me Windows and Linux as well. So simply select the version that you need for your operating system, download, and just work through the installation process. It should be really simple. I'm not going to show you. Next, 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 and then it's installed. So there's no special settings required for this course. Just get Docker Desktop installed. So once you start Docker Desktop, it's going to look a little bit like this. I already have some images, containers, and volumes. So this is what it's going to look like when we start using Docker Desktop. But for now, let's talk about the three important concepts to understand early on. Right, so first of these important concepts is Docker images. Docker images are the starting point for any container. So think of an image as a blueprint. It contains everything you need for the application to run, the code, libraries, and settings. So images are read-only, meaning once they're built, they stay the same until you update them intentionally. They can also be reused across different containers, keeping development simple and consistent. We then have Docker containers. So containers are live running instances that are created from Docker images. So they are lightweight, self-contained environments where your application actually runs. Because containers are isolated, they won't interfere with anything else on your machine. You can start them, stop them, or remove them easily whenever you need to. And then finally, Docker volumes. So volumes are used when you want to store data outside of your container. So unlike the container itself, which can be removed or restarted, a volume keeps your data safe and separate. This is especially important for things like database information or any files you don't want to lose if a container stops or gets recreated. So a Docker container can run just about any type of application. Of course, in this course, we want it to run an instance of Redis. So we're going to need a Redis image. So let's start with Docker Hub. So Docker Hub is a container library or an image library. In here, we're going to find images for all sorts of software that we can run in containers. So if I type in Redis, this is going to give me the official Redis image, which I can download and then start as a container. And then in that container will be the Redis software, which we can then start to use and interact with. So the process starts really from Docker Hub. We go ahead and download an image to our Docker desktop, which then manages our image for us. So let's imagine we download Redis from Docker Hub. So we're now going to take this image and actually then build a container. So a container is an isolated environment, which means by default, we cannot actually get into or connect or talk to our Redis software inside of this container. So in order to actually access this container, we need to open up a network port, because how we're going to interact with our container is through our network, our internal network. So in order to access our software in this container, we need to open up a port, which is essentially a door for us to then send traffic to the software in the container. So what's important to understand about this container is that anything we save in this container by default will be lost if we were to delete or restart this container. So the idea is that when we want to persist data, we then connect our container to a volume. And there are different types of technologies here in Docker we can use, or different types of volumes. But generally, we connect our container to a volume. And that way we can then store data permanently on this volume. So if we were to actually then remove or stop our Redis container and then start it again, we can then hook it up with the previous data before it was then removed or deleted. So that's how we can persist data with a container. Now, the real benefit of this type of setup is that we can literally create a Redis instance in seconds just by downloading an image, in comparison to having to install that ourselves on our local machine. Other benefits include the fact that if we do install software on our machine, we can't easily just delete it and start again. But obviously with a container, we can. We can simply just stop the container and then restart it and then carry on from a point if we've connected to a volume. So this will all be managed within Docker Desktop, although we will be programmatically requesting for our image to be downloaded and started. Everything can be managed in Docker Desktop. So here you can see some images that I have downloaded, one of them being Redis, one of them being a Postgres database, and you can see some other custom images that I've created for Django applications. So eventually these images will be turned into containers. So you'll find an area here for containers. Now we're going to be creating a multi-container setup. So we have this compose stack name at the top here, which we can control. And here we can just then identify the images that we're working with on this course. Now here in Docker Desktop, we have a traffic-like system almost. The green here indicates the fact that the container is live and working correctly. If the container wasn't working correctly, we'll see a ring start to roll around, and that would indicate we have a problem. Now, a container, like we said, is an isolated environment. It's like having a computer in a computer, if you like. So in here, what we can do is we can actually see the logs from this container. We can interact with it using a command prompt, and we can also see the files that make up this container. Importantly, every time we start a container, it will take up memory and potentially CPU usage. And you can see here that I've got 2 containers. It's currently taking up 0.75% of 10 cores, and it's using 128 meg of memory. Of course, your usage will probably vary depending on the type of computer that you have and how much memory you have. Right, so we now have Docker installed. Let's move to the next tutorial where we'll go ahead and finish off these learning objectives, creating and running a simple Redis container, and then just verifying that Redis container is running correctly.